All right, hi everybody. Thank you very much for staying. I know I'm standing between you and the rest of the evening. My name is Macy. I'm a professor in the real estate department. Actually, the last time I was at the Global Forum was in the Lincoln Center in New York, and having grown up in Malaysia and did my high school in Singapore for 4 years here, it's a really great pleasure that my next Global Forum is in Singapore here, and I'd love to share some of my research with you. So I do a lot of research on labor mobility and choosing where to live and whether networks matter. Right today, we've heard a lot about networking. And this is work with my colleague at Wharton, Professor Fernando Ferreira. And so for many years at Wharton, we teach this class, a bread and butter class called Real Estate Investments at Wharton. And a lot of students who are graduating, who are not real estate majors, take the course. And they say they take the course because they think, choosing where to live after they graduate is very important, but it's a very complicated decision, and they want to understand how the experts decide whether to own a home or to rent and where to live. And we do have a large body of evidence showing that, where you live is very important for your professional and your personal quality of life. It is a very complicated decision, right? We also heard about all these trade-offs, right, between choosing to be close to family, choosing to be close to your professional network, thinking about school quality for children, crime. There's so many trade-offs. There's a lot of information out there. And how do you process all that information to make good decisions? There is also definitely this notion of the fear of missing out. Right? Because of my background of being in Asia and the US, I get a lot of students coming to me to say, after I graduate, should I stay in the US? Should I go home to Asia? And so students find that to be a very vexing question, especially for young people who lack the experience. And so what did we do? So we actually designed this new neighborhood choice program, and we offered it to a large professional school in the East Coast that has to remain unnamed. We rolled it out in April 2019 to introduce the students, how we can use data to improve decision making. And largely, the program is a 7-minute online survey. Our main constraint is the attention span of the students. So 7-minute online survey to internalize all that information. And then after that, we also offer this mapping tool. So in our focus group discussions on how to provide a service that can be useful to students, we had a lot of discussions, and 2 things came up to be very important. The first one is cost of living. So a lot of these students live in very expensive cities. They have a lot of student debt. Tuition is very expensive. So cost of living was a very major concern for them. The second one was where their friends lived, where the network is. That mattered a lot to them. And that's where we thought we could actually provide more data to share with everyone. Because we heard that the way people acquire information is through word of mouth, through the networks, and sometimes that can actually be pretty selective. So we got permission to crunch a lot of the administrative data of the full network, but we could only do this for the top US cities where there was enough people in the data so that we could just present aggregate statistics that is accurate, but also protects the confidentiality of the graduates. So these are the cities that we've chosen to provide information on. And so we spent a lot of time grouping places into neighborhoods using Google Trends, census data, and all of that. And so then here's just synthesizing everything into 4 steps. So this is the user experience of somebody participating in this program. So the first thing they tell us is, which city do you want to live in after you graduate? So here I'll give you an example of New York. And so the first thing then we say, okay, well, if in New York, here are the 20 neighborhoods. Now rank up to 10 neighborhoods that you want to live in and you're considering. And actually, interestingly, they only rank about 5 on average. So not all. It's expensive to search, and it's very costly in terms of time. So after ranking the neighborhoods, then we ask them, here's the meat of the program, which is the information. And so first we find out, their best guess of these 2 neighborhood attributes. So we ask them, think about all the alums who graduated in the last 10 years who live in New York City, your city. What share live in the neighborhoods that you're considering, right? And then the second one is, what is the monthly rent in those neighborhoods? So after getting their best guess of those 2 neighborhood attributes that they say is very important, Then we provide them with the information we have on the full network, and we share all that information with all the graduates. And so this is the first thing we found, right, that's very striking. We found that there is this systematic overestimation of network shares by 6 percentage points, which is really high. So here you can see we are taking the difference between the perceived network shares and the actual network shares, and you do see this systematic overestimation. It's 6 percentage points, which is a lot because the mean is only 5%. I'll give you a heat map to just tell the story. So a very popular neighborhood that came up in a lot of the focus groups was Chelsea. So Chelsea is, the stories we keep hearing was that we think the typical graduate gets a job in Google, lives in Chelsea, which is very expensive, goes to the Chelsea market, walks the High Line. It's a beautiful life, but very expensive. Right, so here on this side, you can see the perceived network shares, and the takeaway is that it's just a lot bluer, meaning the perception is that the network is way more clustered than it actually is. Right, so here, the share of graduates who live in Chelsea as perceived by the students is more than twice what it actually is. So the actual network is way more dispersed and not as clustered as students think it is. We've done the same for cities as well. So it's maybe in a new paper. The notion that the typical student graduates and goes to New York, right, that share is much lower than what it actually is. It's much lower, the actual share is much lower than the perceived share. The same thing we've done for rent, and here we actually see a symmetric error, so there's over and underestimation of rents. And then after that, we provide them with the information, and what we do is we provide them with a whole list of neighborhoods in New York City, the city that they choose, and then we give them the dark dots are what the actual monthly rent is from market rent from Zillow data, and then the red dots are their perceptions. We don't show the network shares here since it's confidential information, but the idea for the network shares is we give them the same list of neighborhoods, and you can see visually it's just going to be, the black dots are going to be very close to 0 because the average is 5%, and the red dots will be very far above 0. So there is definitely this idea that their perception is way above what it actually is. So then after that, we do the last piece, which is we ask them to re-rank after having seen all that information. And so when we provide that information, we give them the whole list of neighborhoods with the rent and also the network shares. Right, and then after that, we crunch numbers as researchers, right? So we have here now very valuable information on the same person, same individuals ranking neighborhoods before and after information. And of course, as professors, you want to know, did our respondents, right, these students, did they internalize the information and improve their decision making? And the punchline is yes, right? So we classified the neighborhoods into 4 categories. Always top neighborhoods, like Chelsea, it's always top for a lot of students. So always top neighborhoods, never top neighborhoods, switching, and then the more interesting ones are the ones that were switched in and switched out after information. And what we want to know is just the average rent and the average network shares of these neighborhoods, these 4 types of neighborhoods. So the first one is just to show you the always top and the never top. Right? So the always top neighborhoods have higher network shares than the never top neighborhoods. The never top neighborhoods are the ones that are very far away from the city center. The always top neighborhoods are also very expensive, right? So it's very expensive to get access to the networks compared to the never top, right? So the popular neighborhoods are just expensive and have larger networks. More interestingly, we definitely see students responding to the information and switching in and out neighborhoods as we hope they would do, right? So we see students switching in neighborhoods that have high network shares. However, they're doing it in a way that lowers their cost of living. So they're using the network, right, to improve the decision making and find good deals. Okay, so we see them switch in neighborhoods that have higher network shares and lower cost of living, because they learn that there are actually a lot of neighborhoods out there that are cheaper, but you still can get access to networks. So the 2 dots at the top, the blue dot is just the regression estimates that survive individual fixed effects of 2.5 percentage points of network shares, which is large relative to a mean of 5%, and rent of $347, which is also a sizable cost savings. This is just a heat map to show you the popularity, right? So darker blue means more popular, and you do see this notion that Chelsea was very popular before the information, And after the information, Chelsea still remains popular, but less so. So there's some switching out of Chelsea that's expensive. And then there's some switching in of Williamsburg, which is much cheaper. We follow the same students throughout their search process after the 7-minute online survey, and we find similar patterns even after the survey. So here's a mapping tool that we created that students can go in and click and see more information. And using the map clicks to define top neighborhoods, we see the same pattern of switching in and switching out expensive neighborhoods. And what's very gratifying is we also follow the students until 1 year after graduation, and we find out where they actually live. So we can also tabulate on average what their monthly rent is and also the network shares. And we find the same pattern where they're switching in, they're still getting access to networks, right? So they're still switching in network shares that are higher, right? But they're switching in neighborhoods that are really cheap, much cheaper. And so this translates to a very meaningful cost savings of $530 for each month, which is quite sizable. In my remaining time, what I wanted to share with you is also newer research that we've done about the role of the pandemic and working from home and whether networks still matter. So we repeated the same exercise during and after the pandemic. And briefly, let me just give you a quick summary of what we find. So the 2 dots up there I've recapped, right, are the key findings from the 2019 study, where we see switching in of networks of 2.5 percentage points greater and a cost savings of rent of $347. That's in 2019. And the question really for urban economists and real estate, right, people is really, are we going to see this exodus from city to the suburbs, right? And if that's the case, then what we'll see is that we'll see a sharp trending down, right? Because people will switch in neighborhoods that have lower network shares and also far cheaper. So we would expect a very sharp trending down of the blue dot and the orange dot. And the punchline is like research is really about empirics and the magnitude, right, of what the data is telling us. And what the data is saying is that basically we do see a downward trend, but it's quite slight, right? It's from 2.5 to 2.1 percentage points. And there is a cost savings, definitely during the pandemic, right, because you can't go to bars and restaurants. It's harder to access your network, right? And then in 2022, interestingly, we do see a reversal in the pattern, and it will be nice to continue to see whether this trend is going to continue. All of these, of course, will have implications on living close to the city and the city center and the CBD, whether it will remain vibrant. We do see this trend of moving further away during the pandemic, but again, the data tells you the quantities, right? So we can assess how big of an issue this is, and basically, they're moving further away from the city center, but really not to the suburbs, right? Really, it's more about moving instead of downtown, but to midtown where it's cheaper. Right, so we do see an increase in the distance to City Hall, right, in 2020 during the pandemic. And by then now, we've seen that there's a decline and there's a return back to the CBD. Like in fact, in 2022, for the first time, we see students switching in Chelsea. So it's consistent with our discussion, right, that young people really want to access networks, right? And in fact, I wanted to point out that a lot of what I'm showing you above there is really the marginal, price-sensitive, elastic decision makers, those people who are switching. If you look at the inframarginal decisions, right, they actually have continued to remain flat, which is neighborhoods that are very, very popular, always top, right? They continue to be very close to the city center compared to the never top neighborhoods. And that pattern has remained. So now, what does this all mean, right? All this research, what does it mean for you, your decision making, right? I think what I've learned is that choosing where to live is important and complex, as the students have said, those that took our class. Right, but we are here at Wharton and we learn about the power of the network. And the idea is that use all of the network as much as possible, and it's very useful to search broadly. We continuously use our network to acquire information, but try to acquire from as broad a network as possible. It's useful to have as much information as possible, and relying on just your perceived networks or your perceptions of your networks, right, can bias us. And so we want to be careful about making sure we have as broad of a network as possible. We've also looked into understanding, whether people are reconsidering where they want to live and work. And what we found is that young people, right, continue to want to live near the cities. It's very convenient, right, for a real estate professor to learn that, cities will continue to survive, right? Many young people continue to tell us that they want to live in cities. It's quite different from the discussion about the broader population who want to move to the suburbs to work from home. And with that, I end, and I wish you well at the Wharton Global Forum, and continue with your networking, reconnecting with old friends, and then making new connections. Thank you very much for your time.